as fresh as you can get.
Yes, it was very fresh.
It's got a full cup. That's 8 ounces. It's a big cup.
You should check the chicken for the gun Israel.
What?
You should check the chicken for the gun Israel.
The thing is, what I've found is that you'd want the parents to know, because some parents nowadays might feel that you're exposing their children to something they don't want their children exposed to.
Sure.
We did it as a demonstration at Or Sameach when I was teaching there. I had a friend who was a shoichet, and there was strong feeling beforehand about the fact that we were shechting a chicken to show shrita. They felt like that was, but it led to really good conversation.
Right, yeah.
And then it was
Like studies of children who have grown up on farms, so they
Yeah.
have much healthier attitudes towards death,
right.
birth.
I agree,
reproduction.
but you have to have
Right,
that
yes.
conversation. If you just drop it on them,
Yeah.
and there's parents who think you did it. But once you've had the conversation, it leads to a very
Trippy, very trippy.
it leads to a very deep experience. It was very moving. Even some of the people that were really against it afterwards came back to say that it was very moving, because you are seeing the connection between the life and the food that we eat, etc. Okay,
Do you say a prayer right before you do it?
You say a
Or you say
on a chicken, you say a prayer when you cover the blood.
okay.
But I don't remember.
Isn't there a poem or something? Or something. I remember something. This is back when I was younger, though.
Yeah, the problem with shchita is it may not end up being a kosher shchita. I think that's part of the issue. And then you didn't do anything, so you don't want to make a blessing before something that's iffy. I think that's part of it. I think that's part of the issue why there is one. But certainly, in our case, because we don't do it regularly, the entire process was getting a lot of our attention, and it was a very deep thing. Okay, I am very grateful to be able to learn with you guys tonight. Hello, Dad. Hello, Judy. Hello, Arona. Hello, Steve. Hey, Lois.
Hello, Rabbi.
Hi, Arona. It's very excellent to see your avatar.
It's excellent to see your human face.
There you go. Thank you. And there's Steve's face, the punim. There you go. Wonderful to see you. And even if it's just your avatar, it's good to see that too. And here in person, we have Hannah, we have Liz, we have Lynn, we have David, and we have Jason. So I'm very grateful to all of you. This Torah portion, this Parsha that we are connected to, involved in, learning this week is Chukas. And one of the subjects of Chukas is death. So it starts with the red heifer, which is part of the ashes of the red heifer mixed with spring water, are part of how a person resolves the impurity that comes with contact with death. So although a lot of the focus is on the resolution, but the reason we're resolving it is because a death happened, a human death. And then after that, Miriam dies. So that's the beginning of chapter 20. Miriam dies and she's buried there, and then right away they don't have water. And then the episode of Moshe and Aaron. Moshe hitting the rock instead of speaking to the rock, and they're told that they're not going to lead the people into Israel. And then we have the death of Aaron. Which is also in this Torah portion. So there's lots of discussion about death. And so it gives us an opportunity to meditate on it a little bit. So without knowing a lot about what happens after we die, that's one of the exhibits in the Museum of Things you would expect to find in the Torah, but do not. There was not a thorough discussion about what happens after we die. Our tradition is, and this is something that is alluded to in Tanakh, but it is fleshed out a little bit more in the Talmud, but not even the Talmud does not do a thorough job of talking about what happens after we die. But it is fleshed out in the Talmud. This notion that we are a self-aware being and that we have, each one of us individually, have existed before we were born, and we continue to exist after we die. There's a wisdom story about a student who was talking to his master, and he told the master that he's afraid to die. So the master told him, how do you know, or asked him, how do you know you were born? So he said, what do you mean? He said, how do you know you were born? Of course I was born. How do you know you were born? I have a birth certificate. I have, there are pictures of me just being born. My parents told me I was, they were there. My parents told me about my birth. I know I was born. And so he said to him, because you believe you were born, that's why you're afraid to die. In other words, if you accept the story that you started at some point, then it makes sense that you would end. But it's not our tradition. Our tradition is that you did not start. That was a stage, a kind of transformative stage that happened to you, that happened to me. But it's not when we began. We existed already as some kind of a self-aware being. Now, self-aware does not necessarily mean that our present awareness, our present consciousness is the same as our awareness before, or that our present consciousness is the same as our awareness after. In other words, when I think about myself now, what I think of to be me, that processor, if we could use that term, like a kind of processor, that processor may not be the same one that was used before, and may not be the same one that's used after. I have some kind of self-awareness, but it's not necessarily the same awareness I have now. What I mean by that is that when we speak of ourselves, when we speak of who we are, in essence, we tend to think we are our thoughts and memories. But let's say we lost our thoughts and memories. There are people that lose their thoughts and memories. So those people don't cease to exist. We don't necessarily believe that there's an existential difference between somebody who's lost all their memories, or let's say they had an accident and their personality changed, or we don't necessarily have to accept the notion that somehow they're a different person. There could be a personhood that is deeper than that. And that is an opportunity to explore and meditate what it means to say that I am. What am I? What am I? I remember teaching at a place called Scharfman's. This is a seminary that is in Israel. It's a school for women who've just graduated high school. They're taking a gap year, and then they're gonna, or maybe two, and then they're gonna go back to college.
Sounds like a deli.
Scharfman's?
Yeah.
I know, it has that name. So I taught a class that was Ben Adam Lechavero, which is about relationships between people. So I would start the course with a question. I asked the students, who are you? I want you to write a paragraph answering that question. Who are you? And after groans from the class, because I was asking them to take out a piece of paper and a pen, which is already a painful thing to suggest. And then there were things like, well, what should I write? What are you asking? And I'm asking, who are you? Just write a paragraph about who you are. It's not complicated. Just put it down on paper. And so they're like writing away. And then I collect them and I tell them I'm not going to read names. I'm just going to read out how you answered this question. And we went one through another. I'm 17 years old. I'm from Staten Island. My father's a doctor. My mother's an accountant. I have, two sisters. We have a station wagon. I like ice skating or something like that. You'd have a lot of rights. Some people tried to game it, like I am the sum total of my friendships or things like that. But everybody is in some, they don't stray far from each other. And then at the end, I asked them, do you think that you've answered the question? Have you been able to capture and share with me who you are, the essence of who you are? And they all readily admitted that they had not. And then we talked about that a little bit, and we talked about who they're not. You're not what you own. You're not your car. You're not your house. You're not, etc. And then you're not your circumstances or situation. And they were readily willing to let go of those things. You're not your profession. You're not a doctor. You're not a lawyer. You're not a carpenter. You're not a this. You're not a that. If you were one of those things, then the minute you stopped doing it, you would cease to exist. And some people may feel that way after that happens, but it's not the reality. In fact, Shabbos is an opportunity to sort of explore that, because on Shabbos, you're not a carpenter. I remember there was a man, when I lived in Beit Vegan, the first year and a half that we got married, we lived in this neighborhood called Beit Vegan. And there was this beautiful shul building that had it was called the Grosh Shul. So it had part of the building was devoted to people who davened according to the customs of the Vilna Gaon. But there was also a big chunk of it that was a Hasidisha shul, that was called the Hasidisha shul. So, and I remember in the Hasidisha shul, there was a man who was majesty on Shabbos. He was absolute majesty on Shabbos. He wore a beautiful kaftan. He had a shtreimel, and everything about his way in that shul, he was always treated with dignity. They used to, instead of just handing out aliyahs, they would auction them off, and all the special ones, he would be the guy to pay the big bucks for the big one. During the week, he was an electrician, and he had a van with the name of his company on the side. And, you know, if you looked at his fingers, you could tell this is a man who does that kind of work, etc. But on Shabbos, he was a king, and he lived like it was the most funny, but also beautiful kind of transformation that happened. So you get to experience that once a week. You are not, whatever it is that you do the other 6 days, they aren't you. You don't cease to exist on Shabbos just because you can't do those things. You aren't your vocation. You aren't an adjective. So you're not tall, you're not short, you're not smart, you're not dumb. I mean, these are things if we think just for a second, we know these aren't true descriptions of a person. They only make sense when you're around other people. They're a way of distinguishing you, perhaps, within the group, but they don't have any intrinsic meaning. But yet, you know, we are attaching all those kinds of things to our sense of self. So we aren't any of those things. So just erase all those things. That's what I was suggesting for them. And then we just sat there for a moment and thought about it. What's left? What's left? And so I remember the first time I ever did this. So I ended up teaching, let's say it was 80 students. Which made up the main student body. There was a second-year program, but of the first-year program. The next week I came back, and there's like a buzz. As I'm coming back, there's like a buzz, and different people are coming over to me. I heard you prove to them they don't exist. What could be left? The only thing that's left is me. And that's Ram Dass. Richard Alpert has this story in Be Here Now, his classic book, Be Here Now, where he tells the story the first time he took mushrooms. And so he's like, the way I remember it being told in that book, I've heard him tell this story over different times, and there's always different details, but the way I remember it from the book, and it may not have anything to do with how it's written in the book, but the way I remember it is, he's sitting in a room by himself, and the mushrooms start to hit. And he is looking at the doorway, and in the doorway is him, Richard Alpert. This is Ram Dass's real name. You know, his original name was Richard Alpert, as dressed as in cap and gown, because he was a professor at that time. At the time, he was a professor at Harvard, so he's dressed all up, you know, as a distinguished professor at Harvard. He's standing in the doorway, and then he says, "Well, that's not really the essence of who he is." So now the image of Richard Alpert, just the guy who's hosting this party, you know, the one all his friends know, is standing in the doorway, and then he goes, "I guess that's not the essence of who I am." And then suddenly it's Richard Alpert, part of the Alpert family, with his father and his mother, and, you know, where he comes from and his heritage and all that kind of stuff. And then he goes, "I guess that's not my essence. I mean, I could be in a witness protection program and, you know, completely different life. I guess that's not my essence." So then he starts to notice that his body is disappearing. So his feet start to disappear, his hands start to disappear, and slowly his whole body is disappearing. And he starts to get anxious, at the edge of panic, because he's about to disappear, when, you know, he realizes he has disappeared. There's no more body, no more anything visible. And a voice goes, "You're still here." And so there's these are avenues to explore what it means to be me. But there is an essence. That is our tradition. Our tradition is there is an essence, and this essence is self-aware, and it is you at the core, at the essence of who you are. That is you. And that has been there before this, and that will continue to be here after this. Death, like birth, are markers for this plane of existence. Our tradition also is that this plane of existence that we're on is just one of several planes. It's not, this isn't the only place that existence happens. It's not the only place that it plays out. As I was mentioning, we exist before we're on this plane. We exist after we're on this plane. We give names to these planes, poetic names. We describe some characteristics about it, but at the same time, we acknowledge that we don't really understand what they mean. It's like explaining to somebody what it's going to be like to go away to college, and they've never been away, from their home at all. And now you're telling them what's it going to be like when you go to college. So you say all sorts of things, and they hear you, but they don't really understand you until they get there. Then they go, oh, this is what he was talking about. This is what he meant. And, and that information is useful, but again, it doesn't help you. Your friends could be talking to you 1,000 times. What's it going to be like to be in Israel? You were never in Israel. What's it going to be like to be in Israel? So people tell you all sorts of things and give you advice. When you get there, do this, make sure you do this, and make sure you do that. But the reality of what it is that they were describing is there's no comparison between the reality and what you imagined that reality before you got there. And so it is with almost every stage of development, let alone that next stage. So that's what it's like. That's the best that anybody can do, is to give you some kind of general description and rules of thumb, perhaps, how to make your most out of your time there. But more than that, you just sort of have to, we're told you sort of have to wait till you get there in order to fully, experience it. But there is a there. That's an important part of our tradition. When I say it's an important part of our tradition, I mean, it's always been there as part of the oral tradition. And there are hints to it even in the written tradition. For some reason, the Torah doesn't talk about it. That's the exhibit in the Museum of Things You Would Expect to Find in the Torah and Do Not. And there are different reasons why that might be. Hannah over here has 7 reasons in her duties of the heart. It has a little section where it has 7 reasons for why it doesn't describe the reward in the world to come. In the Torah, there's all sorts of speculation. One of them could just be because the Torah just wants to focus on the here and now. It doesn't want us to be focused on the next world. If the next world inspires you to be more proactive in this world, great. But the work that we're doing here is meant to be done here, and it's meant to be done in the present. So maybe that's why it doesn't want to talk too much about it, because it wants us to stay focused on while we're here. And that's part of this sort of mystery of dealing with death, because I'm going to call it a mystery of dealing with death. What I mean by that is how to deal with death is itself mysterious. What are we supposed to do about it? Let's say we accept the notion that I'm going to continue to exist after what we call death. I'm going to continue to move on. So what am I supposed to do about that now? How am I supposed to deal with that now? So the Torah has many examples even in the narrative portion about people that we've gotten to know who die and how that death is treated by their family. And it's always treated as serious. It's a serious moment. It's not taken lightly. It's not like somebody's saying, well, this is just, and it's described by Rav Chaim Volozhiner. He writes that death is like a hair. You were here, now you're there, and that threshold that you crossed over is like a hair's breadth. The entire thing is just like the width of a hair, a single hair. It's that insignificant. You were just here 1 second, now you're there. The experience of it, right? So, but we don't treat it lightly. We don't say that it's no big deal, because you're still okay, you're still there, and you've moved on. No, it's always treated dramatically. This death of Miriam in Moshe's life, it may have been one of the most significant moments of his life when she dies. And we know that because right after she dies, he out of anger smacks this rock, and that's where the judgment happens, that he can't lead the people into the land of Israel. And why did it happen? Because he was angry over the death of Miriam. It appears, because right before that story, Miriam died. They don't have water. The Midrash suggests they don't have water because Miriam was sort of the merit for whom they got water in the first place. But something's missing. And then suddenly he's angry and does something, and that thing there can't be a coincidence. This is not a coincidence. So clearly, even though Moshe is very familiar with how things work, if you look at Aaron's death, which the nation mourns Aaron's death. But Aaron's death is a beautiful death. It's called like the kiss of death or kiss of God. He is prepared. He's told it's going to happen. He goes up, he's prepared, his family like disrobe him, and he dies. It looks like the kind of death we would all want to have at that last moment. So you couldn't get a better death than Aaron gets, but the people still mourn him. They still mourn him. So this is not taken lightly, even with all the knowledge of the fact that the soul is not ending and it's moving on, and the assumption of all of our assumptions about wherever the person's moving on, they would much rather be there than here. So it's not about them, but it's about us. My teacher, Moshe Shapiro, who was, as far as all of his students were concerned, was a master of all this material and was a master of appropriate behavior in every situation. He was a very disciplined man. And when his daughter passed away as a teenager, he tried to throw himself into the grave. He was in the full throes of mourning, for her loss. And you see it, you see in every one of the situations where death is happening to like the protagonists in the Torah, you see that mourning happen. Mourning is the appropriate response to it. Mourning is a recognition that there is loss. There is sadness in the wake of mourning, and there is loss. So I am no master of this, but just noticing some of this, there's a recognition that something is over. There is something that's over. And one of the things I'm exploring now is that one of the things that is over is relationships. That while we continue to exist, to move on, relationships don't necessarily move on. So what I mean by that is, right now, we were talking about this in our Rambam class today, that David Temkin was exploring the notion of partnership. Is there a relationship between partners. Now, what would we mean by a relationship between partners? So he was suggesting, well, one way we could define it is there some kind of halachic ramification from the partnership? So for instance, there is a relationship between husband and wife. There are legal halachic ramifications of that relationship. If somebody's intimate with a wife of a man, that's adultery, and they could be put to death. If a person are husband and wife, and the husband gets kidnapped, the wife is legally responsible to pay a ransom. If the husband dies, the wife is legally responsible to pay for the funeral or for the burial. There are legal ramifications from this relationship, this bond. Now, that's not the only characteristic of the bond, but it has, we can sort of see it by pointing the lens of halacha at it. So with a father and a son, a father has a responsibility to educate his son. Father has a responsibility to make sure his son has a circumcision. A father has a responsibility that, at a certain age, to feed and to protect the son. A son has a responsibility to honor the father. The son could be put to death for cursing a father, or for striking and wounding a father or a mother. So these are relationships, brothers, the relationship between brothers. If one brother dies and he's married and they don't have children, the other brother does yibum. They do levirate marriage. There are halachic consequences to the fact that they are brothers. If one brother falls on hard times, it's the responsibility to help him, to bail him out, falls on the other brother. And sisters, a similar kind of thing. There are halachic ramifications to being sisters. It's forbidden to marry two sisters, while, in other words, while they're both alive. You can't have been married to two sisters while they're both alive. But also, if there's only sisters, they share an inheritance. They are co-inheritors, and they have to divide the property. So these are just little examples, or big examples, of the fact that there is something called relationship, which means there is a bond between people. Now, you can have a bond with an object. It's not just people. You could have a bond with an object. If I own an object, I have a bond with that object. If you take it without my permission, you're a thief. You could be punished for taking I could have a bond with an object. I could have a bond with an animal. I could have a bond with land. The bonds exist. These bonds exist. Now, the bond between me and an object, the bond between me and land, the bond between me and an animal, these bonds, what I mean by an animal is I own the animal. And if somebody if that animal caused damage, I have to pay for the damage that animal caused. Or if somebody stole it, he's a thief. But that bond between me and all those things disappears when I die. I'm no longer the owner of any of those things. I'm not the owner of the baseball card collection. I'm not the owner. In fact, if you write a document, let's say you leave a document, and you say you have a baseball card collection, and you say, after I die, I want my friend Bob to get the baseball card collection. So if you write it like that, Bob will not get the baseball card collection. Because after you die, you can't give anything to anybody because you don't own it anymore. The minute a person dies, all their connection to their property dissolves. It is now owned by the Torah or by God, and it is given to your inheritors. So whoever's in the line of inheritance gets your baseball card collection. Now, there is such a thing. It's called a halachic will, where what you do is, essentially, the wording is that everything you're giving away while you're still alive, right before you die. Because while you're alive, you can give whatever you want to anybody. So it's a matter of how you set it up. Ramosha Feinstein ruled that our wills of today are that, so that you can honor a will of today. So if in your will, the language of the will was the baseball card collection goes to Bob, it goes to Bob, even halachically. Because if it didn't go that way halachically, and you're a halachically observant person, and you were Bob, you couldn't take it, because really it's supposed to go to his son. You'd be a thief for taking it, because if the will didn't work. But he says wills work, right? But that's what it means. At the end of life, those relationships are severed. Those relationships are severed. There's a famous phrase: you can't take it with you. Whatever wasn't spent, the money in the bank, whatever your objects are, those things, they don't go with you. And what that means is the bond is no more. The bond, it does not exist anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. So, what I've been exploring for the last while is what about the bond between people? And the assumption is they also don't go with you. So when you say you can't take it with you, what you also can't take is that bond. The fact that this person was my father in this life, or my wife in this life, or my daughter in this life, that those facts, they do not continue past this world. I am suggesting this. First of all, you will hear people sort of say that when they talk about reincarnation. When they talk about reincarnation, they're open to the idea that there's all new configurations as souls are coming back. So you might have somebody that's your wife in this life, she was your best friend in a previous life, or etc. In other words, that these in reincarnation stories, which who knows where all of these come from, but supposedly they're coming from people who know what they're talking about. But in the reincarnation stories, where the soul is coming back and kind of born again into another body and has another life on this plane, right? So they may interact with people, in different ways, right? But I remember Ramosha Shapiro was talking to us one time. I don't remember what precipitated this specific point, but he said to us that everybody that's a part of our world here is going to be part, in other words, our lives here is going to be part of our lives in Olam Haba, in the world to come. Because Olam Haba is a world that's built out of this world. So those people that contribute and were part of the world that you build out of this world, they're also going to be part of that world. So there's this notion that everybody will be part of it, but who's to say that they're going to be part of it in the same way? Like there's a Gemara where someone has a dream and he wakes up and his father says to him, "What did you dream?" And he said, in this world, in the next world, the people who were the students are now the teachers, and the people that were the teachers are now the students. It's an upside down world. It was a role, like there was it got switched. In other words, this is, again, I'm just exploring this myself. I'm sharing you what I'm exploring with. But it seems to me that this would be the case, that the relationship, the specific relationship, may not last beyond this plane. So where we were parent and child, we may be friends or colleagues, or that, not to say that we won't be with each other, but aren't necessarily the same, the relationship. So in a sense, let's say it's a father bearing his daughter, that even with all the confidence that that she is in a better place and her soul, that her soul continues and everything's going to continue. But that won't continue, perhaps. The father and daughter, the nature of that relationship. There are some things that will get lost and that they deserve mourning, and relationships is one of them. But by the way, even in our lives, as we grow up, our relationships change. The relationship between father and son is a much different relationship when you're a child than when you're an adult. And our relationships with friends gets transformed, etc. We use words, best friend forever when we're little. And then, one of my closest friends, haven't spoken to him in 5 years, but he's one of my closest friends. But, and so the nature of these things changes even in this world. It's not just going to be something, but that is something. Perhaps you could say with Moshe and Miriam that thing that Moshe appropriately is mourning, perhaps, is his sister died. Not that Miriam is in a place he's never going to be able to access again, but his sister, the fact that she was his sister, that's not going to be the same. Or that his brother, the relationship. So when somebody says you can't take it with you, it's very likely that you can't take that with you also, and that's appropriate to mourn. Not the well-being of the person themselves, not that you're never going to see the person again or be with them again, but that the relationship between you, that may not continue to exist. Okay. I spoke about something I know nothing about, but this is very consistent. I'm very consistent. I always am speaking about something I know nothing about. And yet somehow we share that together. We share the nothing. And for that, I'm grateful that we got to share it this evening. I look forward to sharing nothing with you next week. Be well. Be well, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
I mean, it's interesting that in